Welcome to another Bandology interview. Bandology is a Canadian nonprofit dedicated to more music for more kids via education, collaboration, and community.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another Bandology interview series video. I'm Sandy Wright, the Music and Education Coordinator at Bandology, and today I'm talking to Neil Yorke-Slader, the Associate Director of MusicFest, a retired music educator and administrator, and a composer. So, how are you doing today, Neil?
I'm doing really well, Sandy. Thank you very much for asking. I'm delighted to talk to you today.
Awesome. You obviously, as I briefly described, have a lot of things you've done sort of over your career in music. So could you tell me a little bit about what you do now and sort of how you got there?
Sure thing. That comes with getting old. You know, you've got a bigger resume. So as you had indicated, you know, I'm a retired music educator and administrator, and currently then I'm Associate Director of MusicFest Canada. I'm also chairman of the Instrumental Jazz Division of MusicFest. So it's essentially a job. Jim Howard, who's executive director, he and I lead the team that plan and produce a festival in a different Canadian city every year for anywhere from 6,000 to 9,000 kids. We do it in a different Canadian city every year, so that's always a challenge, trying to get the venues worked out and all those kind of details. It's pretty cool because, you know, you get to talk to all the regional coordinators across the country of all the regional festivals and talk to music teachers every day from various parts of the country, and everybody's got a different story. I think that's, you know, there's the commonality of the philosophy or the goals, but there's always a different story wherever you're teaching. So that's kind of neat. And I think part of what I enjoy with MusicFest is when we get together each year, each May in a different Canadian city, there's a team of volunteers that a lot of them have been doing this for many years, and it's like family reunion every year.
You're also the director of the Nepean All-City Jazz Band. Could you tell me a little more about how that project came to be and a little bit more about what you do there?
Yeah, that's a funny story. Just to help situate it for people, Nepean is an area south of Ottawa. It's now part of Ottawa, but when the band started, it was its own city. Sort of like those people that are in the Toronto area, the Etobicoke and Brampton and North York and Scarborough. They all, you know, where people say, where do you live? You say Scarborough, but you're actually in Toronto. Nobody wants to admit to living in Toronto or something. So it's the same here in Ottawa, and people live in Canada or Orleans, and in this case, Nepean. So for my first 8 years teaching, I taught at a school called Meadowlands Public School in Nepean, which is a grade 6 to 8 school. And this is back in the early 80s, and there really wasn't any awareness really of, there weren't jazz bands going on in elementary schools at that stage at all. There really wasn't literature being written and published for that age. There wasn't really a culture of it. And I guess in my case, although I was qualified intermediate senior, grade 7 to at that time 13, I'd done all my practice teaching at the high school level. I never started playing an instrument until I was in grade 9, so I didn't really have too much of an awareness of this. But I got this job at this 6 to 8 school, and so applying my naivete to it, I thought, well, let's have a jazz band. You know, let's do it. And with the enthusiasm and, as I say, naivete of my early career, you know, managed to get it up and running. And the kids loved it, and it became a thing rather quickly. I remember my first, so I started the first band, I think, in the second year I was there, so fall of 82. And, you know, we had 3 alto saxes and a tenor sax and a bass clarinet playing the bari parts. Trombone section was a French horn and a baritone treble clef and 1 trombone. And the bass, I didn't even own an electric bass at the school, so I had the tuba player that was not breathing very often and playing all these bass lines. So I was handwriting. There was no computer program for music at that stage. And I was handwriting for every chart we did. I was handwriting 5 parts out in different keys so that all these people could play these parts. But as I say, the enthusiasm and naivete of early career, and I did it, and the kids played, and you know, it was okay. So as I say, it sort of grew over some time. And one of the neat things with kids in 7/8, they're so enthusiastic, and kids would come back at the end of at the end of grade 8. They've had this experience playing in this jazz band, and they'd say, "Oh, Mr. Yorke-Slader, can we keep the band together?" And I'm like, "Well, I'll tell you what, you guys, it was great, and you go off to high school and hopefully have a great time, and come back and visit if you like, but we'll see how it goes." And inevitably, they would move over to high school and immediately, integrate into the new setting and the more mature setting. And there was never any talk of keeping the band together. And they also went off to different high schools. Our elementary school fed 3 high schools. So we had a band in 85, 86 that went to Vancouver for nationals. That sort of evolved too, because at the time MusicFest didn't have an elementary jazz band class. The youngest class was for grade 9 and 10 bands. And so we ended up going in the festival, and we started qualifying by doing better than grade 9, 10 bands. So it really started to become a bit of a thing, as I say. So anyway, I had this group in 85, 86, went up to Vancouver for nationals. And so we were fundraising every weekend, and really we're a tight group. And I got the same thing at the end of the year. Mr. Yorke-Slader, we should keep the band together. Yeah, great. Have a great time in high school. See ya. And off they go. And I didn't really think any more about it. And the next year's band was a really good band. A year later, so the band from 86, they were about to go into grade 10 at school. They'd had a full year of high school. My doorbell rings. And 2 of the musicians from that band, the 86 band, knocking on the door, and Mr. Yorke-Slader, it's been a year and we really miss it, and would you think about putting together an alumni band? And to me, that was very different. That was not, I'm insecure about going off to high school and I want everything to stay the same. That was, I've been at high school for a year. This is something that's important to me, and we would really like to do this. So I talked to them some more and got out a piece of paper, and we looked at, I'd say, the bands from that year and the year after, because we didn't think the mix would be there in terms of all the people maybe wanting to do it. So part of this was, do you think it'll happen? And I sent them away with a list of 19 musicians that we had both thought, okay, this will be a great band. And I said, well, if you get all 19, let me know. So that was, I don't know, on a Monday or something. So by about Friday, I'm getting excited because I'm thinking, wow, I could do all this more complicated music that I'd always buy for the band, but never could play because they weren't ready for it. Mm-hmm. So I've got music. And I called up one of them, and she started to cry. And I said, what's the matter? And she said, well, I only got 18 out of the 19. But because Mr. Yorke-Slader had said, if you get 19, I'll do it, she was devastated because she'd only got 18 out of 19. And, it's a black and white world, and that's what he said. So anyway, we had a discussion, and we picked up one more name, and she immediately called me back like 10 seconds later after talking to him and said, oh, yeah, well, I got 19. Then, of course, you try and figure out when you're going to rehearse and all those kind of details. That's how the band got started. It was a Meadowlands public school alumni jazz ensemble. And somewhere during the first year, somebody said, well, where can we get some money from? Maybe we can get some money from the city. So we'll call ourselves Nepean All-City Jazz Band.
Yeah.
And then they'll give us money. Again, naivete or whatever. The interesting thing was then at the end of the first year, 2 of those players moved on. And in the auditions, we opened it up at that point to the whole city of Nepean. So the 2 new people, one of them actually had been from the following year's Meadowlands band, but one came from out in further west. So that was sort of the beginning of it becoming the whole city of Nepean. And then somewhere along the road, I don't remember when, but we opened it up to the whole city of Ottawa. And somewhere along the road, we just said, hey, if you're willing to drive here for rehearsal, you can come from anywhere. So we've had people from Arn Prior, we've had people from Russell and Carleton Place and Aylmer, which is over in Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if you're willing to drive to rehearsal, you can come play in the band. So I say that's a long story, but I always like telling it because it has such a charm to it with these two, how old were they then? 15-year-old girls coming and ringing my doorbell and saying, "Hey, can we have a band?" So it's now, and we stayed together basically right through high school, through their high school years, and it's stayed a band of that age. It's been going. This would be, if we can start up this year, would be year 35. Mm-hmm. Unless we count last year as a non-year, so then in which case it would be year 34. And they've been all over the place and played for, all kinds of music conventions and great concerts, and it's been an amazing experience for me. There are people that I've been on stage with that I would never in my life be on stage with as a musician to myself. Mm-hmm. And the only reason that I've been on the same stage as them is because they're playing with my band. Great jazz musicians. So it's been a wonderful experience, hopefully for everybody, but it just started with somebody ringing my doorbell.
That's a wonderful story. That's so cool that it sort of came out of it was a student-led initiative that sort of it speaks to the impact that the 7/8 band you were doing had on those kids, that they wanted to pursue it beyond sort of that. And it's cool that legacy has continued through the years of two people coming up and going I really like this and I still want to do it. And says a lot about, I think, how music can, drive people into communities and create really sustainable things.
There's a pedagogical piece to it, which only occurred for about 3 years, but it's interesting because if you go back to the beginning, I taught all these kids how to play their instruments. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it was interesting, the trombone section, so there were 5 of them, and I taught them all to play. Mouthpiece goes on here, hold it like this, right? When they were in grade 7. That trombone section stayed together right through till the first group graduated at grade 13. So 4 years. So they played together at 7 and 8. Then they'd gone off to high schools, various high schools. And then from 10 to 13, they all played together. And we would go and play at festivals, and the adjudicators would always say what an incredible blend the trombone section had. And I often wondered, most of them bought the same horn because the store in town, that's what it sold, right? So they're playing the same horn. They got the same teacher showing them how to play, and they work with them. I mean, how many in Ontario? Certainly, there aren't a lot of 7. There are some 7 to 12 schools, but you basically, you're not working with the same person all the way through. So anyway, it's been an element of my life that has had a major role. And as I say, because 2 15-year-olds rang my doorbell one day.
That's a really interesting, that sort of the way that they were complimented and they had those sort of, that relationship was sort of the underpinning of a lot of that. And that's something that is important when you're performing, is having some sort of at least performance relationship with the people around you so you can play together. I notice that when I'm in a band and we have somebody missing and everything just seems like it's going wrong, even if we get through the song, nothing feels right because we've been playing together for 3 years, and it's we need to, that relationship is so important to us functioning. You mentioned that the first time you picked up an instrument was in grade 9. So could you tell me a little bit how you got from, did you have any music experience before picking up that instrument in grade 9? And then how did you sort of go from, I'm playing in a band in grade 9 to I'm going to be a music teacher?
You're remembering it well. I said I first took up a wind instrument in grade 9, but I played piano since, I'd started piano lessons when I was 7. I'd actually started playing piano before that because my parents were very forward thinking and put us in something in those days called 4-year-old kindergarten, which the Ontario government hadn't actually created at that point. So it was a private school, and it was a French immersion of all things. So, which I haven't particularly kept over the years. But so there I am. I'm in a French immersion 4-year-old kindergarten, and not understanding too much, believe me. And I would come home every day, and I would play the melodies that I had heard in the songs we had learned on the piano, or I would attempt to. But the interesting thing is I'm left-handed, and I would do this with my left hand. And I mean, it was fun. It's just, when you're a kid, you just sort of do stuff, right? You don't think about how or why. So I'd come home and I play these tunes on the piano with my left hand. And at some point along the road, and I don't know how, complicated that got. I just know that because the story has been told to me many times. At some point, my parents went, okay, he's doing this all wrong because the melody is supposed to be in the right hand. And so we better get him some lessons before he gets really screwed up. So they got me piano lessons. And when I was 7, and we were living in a place just west of Montreal called Binge. And so they got me a piano teacher in Montreal, Hungarian concert pianist by the name of Paul DeMarchi, who was in his 80s at that point, and he was nearly blind. And fascinating to go and have lessons with him. I remember it vividly. And the first lesson I went to, he said, okay, here's the C scale, showed me how to play the C scale, taught me, right hand, 1, 2, 3, thumb goes under, blah, 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 and left hand, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, third finger goes over. And he said, okay, now I'm in 7, so it takes a little longer than that, but he said, okay, come back next week and be able to play the C scale with each of your 2 hands, not together, but, play with your left hand, right? And how many people have heard this kind of story, right, from their music when you tell about your first piano lesson?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what made it different. At the end of that, he said, oh, and when you come back next week, I want you to have made up a song using those notes. And I think of all the people that I went to Western with as a piano major and all their stories about their piano teachers that they had and what the focus was and what was important. And I can promise you, nobody else had a story like that. Nobody had a teacher that said, come back next week and play me a song with those notes. And I studied with him for 4 years, and then we moved back to Ottawa. And he did every week, whatever we were doing, make up a song for me. And I'd have to come back next week, and it was fun. But the level of my technique to play what was on the page really became the same level of technique to make something up. And so I was never really disappointed in what I was making up because it really wasn't any easier or more complicated than what I was actually learning on the page. And I think this is, if you take that class of piano majors at Western and you say, okay, go over there and make something up, most of them would say, well, I can't do that. And I firmly believe it's not that they can't do it. It's that their expectations for what they would produce would be so high because what they can play with music, right? Whereas, as I say, I'd started, the creative door was left open for me right from the start. So it was wild. When we moved back to Ottawa, my parents, my mom particularly, she studied piano a bit as a child and had bad experiences. So she would take me around and basically audition piano teachers to replace the one from Montreal. And I know the teachers at the time felt they were auditioning me, whether they would take me or not. But the reality was for my mom and me that the reverse was true as well. And I remember leaving a couple of them and going back down the front walk of their house and saying to my mom, please don't make me go to him. Please don't make me go to her. They said, well, we have to, his technique isn't very good. We'll have to tear him right down to the beginning and start over. And, there were some awful stories. And so we went about 6 months without a teacher. And I was at that point 11 years old. So, there was certainly some risk that I would have quit. And then I met a lady named Wynne Canty, who's no longer with us. Neither is Paul. And she, among the things she did, she composed and performed the music for a local CBC children's show. And so she really related to what I was already doing because this was something that was presented to her when we met her. Well, this is what Neil does. He does this and this, studies the classical pieces, but he's also interested in this. And she supported me through the rest of my time. And she had been basically a teacher of younger kids. She'd never taken anybody up basically to the top of Royal Conservatory in categories. And for the last 2 or 3 years, she kept saying to my mom, well, you you should send him off to somebody at Carleton University or somebody at Ottawa U, because if he's going to go off to university and study, he needs to be with somebody like that. And I just kept saying, absolutely not. I'll quit. Absolutely not. This is what I need. This is what I want. And she was fantastic. I don't know, other influences, I guess. My high school band teacher, who was sort of a controversial guy, because he was very demanding and not particularly patient with people who didn't care too much. And one of the strategies that you need to discover pretty quickly as a music teacher is that if you're going to have a decent music program, there are always going to be lots of kids in there that really don't give a damn. And you got to keep them, or you're not going to have a program, and you're not going to have a band. And he frankly, he sort of struggled with that because he was great with those of us that really wanted to be there. Fantastic. And giving us all kinds of enriching opportunities. So for me, he was great. He had me conducting the junior band when I was in grade 12. I look back now and it's like Huckleberry Finn being allowed to paint the fence. Well, all I know is he'd come in, he'd unlock the door, and he'd go off to his office and he'd hand me the baton. And I don't know what he was doing for 45 minutes, but I was conducting his junior band. But for me, it was a wonderful experience, which I think ultimately gave me some of the foundation for when I got into teaching. So the last person I mentioned is my first principal when I started working at Meadowlands. His name's Keith Hanton, still alive today, still living in Ottawa. Fantastic, wonderful, wonderful man. Supported everything I wanted to do. And he sort of opened my eyes to the idea that a music teacher could become a principal. There weren't any at that point. I was the first one to become a high school principal in our board, first one to become a superintendent. There wasn't really there were no role models there, but he, through his talking to me and encouragement, sort of made me think, oh, that's something like maybe I could do. But what I really remember is every concert we had, he'd come to it. Now, how many principals do that? Now, on top of that, he'd set up a bunch of microphones and he'd record the concert. And then he'd make me, in those days, a cassette. And the following morning, he would hand me the cassette and he'd have taken the program and shrunk it down into a little piece of paper that he put inside the cassette box, and he'd hand it to me. Okay? Beyond that, the staff used to say that when he bought a new truck about halfway through my time working there, and the staff used to say, well, he bought the truck so that he could help me cart around all the music equipment when we went around to schools. Yeah. Because we'd go around. One year we played concerts at 32 schools. We were out all the time, and this was a great experience for the kids. Great from his point of view. And I became a principal, so I get it now. Great for the visibility of the school. Some of the teachers hated it. Kids were missing so much class, and he always handled that. He was always like, don't worry about that. I'll take care of that. You just do your thing, and here, I'll take the other end of that amp and we'll put it in the back of my truck, and when I became a principal, I can tell you, he had a great influence on me as a music educator by giving me opportunities too. But he also became he was a huge mentor for the style that I tried to bring to being a principal.
Yeah. It's wonderful that you can kind of trace a significant portion of your career with those people that stand out to you, those sort of guideposts. I think you talked about creativity being sort of that, the creative stuff matching your technical ability, which I think is really interesting from a pedagogical standpoint, from learning music. And that's something that I know, the thing that unlocked me wanting to do music on another level was the day, part of what was the day my piano teacher was like, cool, we're going to learn how to improvise today. And we spent 3 weeks doing really basic blues.
Wow.
Or longer than that. I did it for a long time. I can play the C blues scale so well. Not much else, but the C blues scale was really good. And he was into jazz. He'd been trained classically, but he was into jazz, and he wanted to pass that on because he knew I wasn't just interested in playing classical music. And that was a moment where I was like, oh, this is way cooler than just playing classical music. And that's part of what ended up me eventually doing composing sort of long term. And so it's really cool that those stories, that I'm not the only person who has a story like that, because I don't know, again, most of the people I know don't teach creativity in their lessons, or at least did it when I was a kid.
It's such a big part of music. I mean, as you say, what composing is something you've written down after you've improvised it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it starts with improvisation. Absolutely right.
Yeah. One thing on that, because you are a composer, so how does that sort of like, did that creativity obviously sort of maybe led into that interest in like becoming an actual composer? And then how did that sort of interact with your work as an educator? Because you mentioned there were no like 7/8 band charts and things like that.
Well, I told you the story, I guess, of where it began. And so by the time it's sort of, you could see the natural evolution of that as I got older and I got higher in my levels of piano, the kind of stuff I was able to make up got more complex. And, I learned a lot about theory. I'll put it another way. When I went to my first year university and was taking some theory courses there, a lot of the stuff to me was, oh, that's what you call that. Mm-hmm. Because in my head, I knew that I'm going to put my hands up here so you can see for piano. I knew that chord went to that chord, went to that chord. I didn't know, nobody told me that was 2-5-1 or D minor 7, G7, C. All I knew was orally, A-U-R-A-L-L-Y, from my experimentation, that was a good sound that went to that sound and went to that sound. I never really analyzed even why, but so I came to it. I learned a lot through that experimental process and came to it with I would call it sort of an organic approach to theory, not a clinical approach to theory. Mm-hmm. Because, even there are, when I studied Paul Hindemith in university, he had a whole way of categorizing levels of dissonance. Well, all I knew is if you put a minor ninth on a chord, it sounded kind of tense. I didn't really have any sense of an overarching construct, Yeah. Anyway, so as part of the experimentation, I wrote a concert band piece when I was about 12, which was really, really awful. But the experience required me, and this is where the teacher had helped, had sort of alerted me to, well, you'll need to know the transposition for all these instruments, and you'll need to know the ranges for all these instruments. I think in retrospect, maybe he was telling me all that to get me to not bother, but it didn't stop me, and I did write the thing. I didn't do much in high school with it. I didn't do much in university with it. I don't think. I was pretty busy, with a degree. I do remember lifting a couple of jazz band charts that I really liked from recordings, which was kind of a cool thing to do, to lift the whole chart. And we played them in the band at Western. When I started teaching, though, at Meadowlands, I was teaching winds and I was teaching strings. And again, there wasn't a lot of good material. Yeah, I wouldn't even put it that way. There's probably material for beginner strings, but a lot of it sounds pretty lame. And these kids were in grade 7 and 8. So what I would do is I would, whatever, pick 2 or 3 pop tunes of the year. Billie Jean was an example by Michael Jackson. Billie Jean was huge. So I arranged Billie Jean for orchestra. And it wasn't really for orchestra. It was for an abomination that I called studio orchestra, which was really orchestra plus electric bass, drum set, 4 clarinets, 4 flutes, couple of trumpets, a trombone, right? And then I would arrange for that so that I could capture what I was looking for in terms of the elements of the song, and I needed those other instruments to help. So but I'd always give the melody would be in the violin. So whenever we did a concert, I was hoping that all the kids in the audience would go, "Oh, I should take violin. This would be fun." And I'd have the clarinets playing like pad notes as if they were an organ, So they were doing all the boring stuff. Anyway, so I did a lot of stuff there. I wrote for string quartet. We had a string quartet. I'd arrange Christmas carols, sort of basic stuff that you just sort of do to make it work. But all arranging, not composing. And I ended up going off after 8 years of that and becoming a high school music teacher. And that's where I started to arrange for jazz band. And that came from, I think initially, there are a lot of ballads that are very one player dependent. A lot of jazz ballads, it'll be for solo alto saxophone and band. And if you don't have a killer alto saxophone, the whole piece, you just sort of limp through it. They can't solo on it. They're not very good. So I started by writing ballads that sort of had all kinds of different parts of the band playing the tune at different times, and hid the fact, I was hoping, that we didn't have a prime soloist for it. 1994, I was still teaching high school music, and a friend of mine named Greg Prest, who was also a music teacher, was teaching out in Winchester, south of Ottawa, and he called me up and he said, "Hey, would you consider writing a piece for my jazz band?" And I said, "Writing? You mean like composing?" And he said, "Yes. Would you compose a piece for my jazz band?" And he commissioned me. I still have the check for $300 up framed here in my office. Yeah. And I said to him, "Greg, I have no idea if I can do that, but I'm willing to try. And so don't keep your money. And if you like it, then you can pay me. But I'll try. And it's kind of a cool challenge." Mm-hmm. And so that's where it started. And that was 25 years ago. And now I've got like 60 jazz band tunes that are available. And I thank him for doing that. It was kind of cool. But that's where it came from. It was, I in some ways, I'm returning to my roots of composing, but I got away from it for a while and I got back to it through the arranging and doing that. In terms of how it connects to teaching, I think being able to look at, if you're in a rehearsal setting and you're able to look at a piece of music with a composer's lens, that's a real advantage to getting to the music. There's two pieces. I think, first of all, it's the picking of the music. I think a lot of teachers have fallen into the trap from time to time of saying, "I really like the song Misty, and here's an arrangement of Misty, so I'm buying that arrangement of Misty for my band." And failing to realize maybe it's written in a key that's not an easy key to play in for wind instruments, or maybe the trumpet part is just a little bit too high, the first trumpet part. So the piece never sounds relaxed when you play it. Or the piano parts aren't written out, or the drum parts are just like slashes or something. The picking of music is, I think, a critical element as to whether your ensemble sounds good. So I think been a composer, when I'm looking at music, I think I'm looking at it a lot tighter. But I think also being aware of the technical requirements of each instrument is helpful. I think I find in rehearsal that I often say, "What do you think the composer is trying to do here?" And the reason I ask that question is, if there's a repeated section, and the first time through the rhythm section and the saxophones play, and the second time through the rhythm section and the saxophones play, and the brasses play background figures, well, what the composer is trying to do is he's trying to build interest. He's trying to build excitement. So even if this piece, all it says at the beginning of the section is mezzo piano, we know as a composer, well, you're a composer, we know that he or she doesn't mean mezzo piano. He or she means mezzo piano the first time, and hopefully some variety through how the melody's going, but he means more louder. It's the second time because he's added instruments, and if he's adding instruments, that's creating a bigger sound. So I think sometimes I do that. I sort of ask myself, okay, what are they trying to do here, and hopefully that helps the kids' insight into the music.
I think that's sort of like having the lens of having tried to do it and learned a little bit about that is always helpful. I know I'm a lot better at writing for instruments that I've played. Yeah. And I think there's sort of that connection of like, if you've done it, you've probably got a little more understanding of how to explain it and how to teach it. And I find that when I am teaching, because part of what I do apart from Bandology is teach, I'm a lot better at explaining compositions and I try to incorporate that even when I'm not, like, to piano students who are just staring at me blankly. But will thank me later. I hope to goodness.
Well, it's funny you mentioned, I didn't get into this, but when I started in grade 9 taking a band instrument, I started on euphonium after half a year, added trombone because it's the same mouthpiece, full bass clef. I was learning baritone bass clef. Started tenor sax in grade 10, switched to alto because they had a spot in the band. The teacher said, hey, if you switch to alto, you can play in the band. In high school, just sort of fooled around with French horn and this kind of thing. I studied violin. There was a string program in the school. And I remember my mom said to me in about grade 11, hey, if you ever decide what instrument you really want to play, I'll pay for half of one. And I didn't buy it until I was graduating from high school because I kept trying different instruments, didn't know what I wanted. And then, of course, at Western, and this is probably true for any university, the music degree, if you're in education, you have some choice in your subjects. And my attitude was I'd much rather learn an instrument than write an essay. So I would take the maximum number of minor instruments available every year rather than take an extra theory course or an extra history course. And ended up coming out of university. I think I took 12 instruments over the 4 years, just for fun. Again, I wasn't motivated by what am I going to do with this. It was just that I thought it would be fun. And what I have discovered, and if you think about people that know 6 languages, if you ask them, they'll say, well, there's a lot of overlap. Well, it's a lot like Spanish, and the same is true. If you play flute, when you come to start clarinet, you're not starting from scratch. When you come to play sax, you're not starting from scratch. When you come to play oboe, you're not starting from scratch, right? So I think that's been a huge help, not only in teaching at an elementary level where you're teaching all these kids to play these instruments, but also in the composing.
Yeah, I've never been able to figure flute out. I don't know why. I can't get a sound, and I feel like a 7th grader again. But every time I try, which is humbling in a good way, but it is also.
For me, it was oboe. I couldn't play oboe to save my life. I just get like back pressure headaches.
Yeah, I think I tried it once backstage at a concert with a colleague back when you could safely interact that closely around wind instruments, and he could play clarinet. I could not play oboe, his oboe to save my life. Which, I mean, he was much good because he was very good at oboe. And he didn't have a threat for me to steal his job. So obviously you've had sort of like varied career where you've gotten to explore a lot of things in education and working in sort of the administrative side and working with like MusicFest and the Nepean All-City Jazz Band. Could you name a couple career highlights you've had sort of from those experiences or from when you were like studying music as a younger student?
The first year that our jazz band at Meadowlands qualified to MusicFest Nationals, and we went. It was in Toronto, so it was close by. We could go. That was 1984. And as I said, I remember a guy coming up to me, high school teacher from St. Thomas, Ontario, came up to me and he said, geez, I didn't realize anything like this was going on in elementary school in Ontario. And I was wide-eyed because I was like, I was only, I had my little world. I got my kids in my class and in my school. And here was this guy putting it in this large context. And as I said to you before, we had to qualify it through the regional festival, doing better than some 9-10 bands. So it was a major thing to get there. And it opened my eyes because then you hear all these fantastic groups from all over the country and you never go back. Like, you may never get there yourself. You may never be able to take your band to that level, but you never go back in terms of what you heard and what you realize is doable. It changes your perspective on what kids can achieve. So that was kind of cool. About 5 years ago, the Nepean All-City Band did 2 concerts with the National Arts Centre Orchestra in the theater, here in Ottawa. And at that point, I was like 55 years old. I'd seen a lot. I'd done a lot of concerts. I'd played with a lot of different people. But to be in rehearsal and actually on the stage when the performance was happening, both of those scenarios were mind-blowing to me on how, first of all, what incredible level of musicianship the National Arts Center Orchestra has. It's not part of my natural instinct to go and, go to the orchestra concert. I live here in Ottawa. That's not true. I've been to a couple, but it's not part of my practice, and I don't think, oh, the orchestra's in town, let's go see the orchestra. Yeah. But I can tell you, oh my God, are they good players? Oh my God, the level of playing, and discipline, and yet they're relaxed. It was amazing to me to see. I think it would be like going to a practice of the Los Angeles Lakers or the Montreal Canadiens or something, and you see these incredibly talented, incredibly focused people that are supreme in their field. So that was cool. From a personal standpoint, I think, because those are both ensemble things I was involved with. Last year, the Ontario Music Educators Association contacted me and said that they were naming me a Honorary Life Member.
Yeah.
And aside from the fact that I'm cheap, and that means I don't have to pay to be a member anymore, that's kind of cool. But no, in seriousness, that's a very dramatic, for me, it was a very dramatic episode or circumstance, because on one hand, what a wonderful honor. On the other hand, you recognize what they're doing is they're recognizing you for your body of work over your lifetime. And the insecure part of me goes, maybe I'm done. Like, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm finished, maybe the best has happened, I hope, and I have those same insecurities as a composer, well, maybe I'll never write another good piece again, that kind of stuff. So It was a wonderful honor. As I say, it was sort of like, oh, I'm at that stage in my life now where I'm being recognized for my body of work. Wow. I thought only old people did that. Oh, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool.
I think that kind of recognition is a really interesting thing to experience. Obviously, I don't have experience with that kind of recognition, but even in a microcosm, that sort of someone going, thank you for the things that you've done and the impact you've had, is a very powerful experience. So I can't imagine what that's like to be recognized by something like that's relatively like large scale as the OMEA, which has obviously cross Ontario.
Well, when I retired from being a superintendent, both my sons were able to be in Ottawa for that party, ceremony, whatever you want to call it. And they spoke. I didn't know who was going to speak. If I was just told to show up at 5:00,
Yeah.
And my older son, Drew, said something which I'd never really, ever really thought of. And he said, my dad has boxes and boxes of plaques and awards in our basement. And I've never seen him ever pull one out and look at it. It's just not what's important. And I thought, wow, like kids notice stuff. And I'd never really thought about it, but I'm going to show you something. The only one I have in my office is the OMEA Honorary Life Membership. That's the only one. Everything else is in a box in the basement, so that must mean something. So.
Yeah. It says a lot about the value of that impact, maybe.
Yeah.
On that note, do you have any advice to young musicians who are interested in pursuing a career like yours?
Well, it's interesting, a career like mine. I think part of the way my career has turned out has been very unpredictable and non-linear. One of my good friends is Sharon Fitzsimmons, who's a legendary music teacher from Barrie. And she'd worked in the same school for 35 years and did amazing things. And as a music teacher, I don't think it's the natural inclination is to move around a whole lot. You try and get things the way you want them, and then you try and keep them that way, So for me to go, elementary school for 8 years, give up my seniority, go to a high school, over 5 years becoming the department head there in a big program, leaving that to go to another high school with a very small program to build that, to become a vice principal, to become a principal, to get moved around as a principal, to become a superintendent. That's not, I would call, a normal career. It's been a very interesting career. I don't know. I guess the advice I would give to people is you have to follow your instincts. Because, it didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense at the time to give up my seniority after 8 years and go to teach high school with the possibility of getting bumped out after a year. It probably didn't make sense to give up my headship to go to a smaller, less successful program, but it was a wonderful experience. Even to go become a VP, you might think, well, it's a promotion. Well, sure, it's a promotion, but you're giving up the thing you've studied your whole life. You're giving up your love of being able to make music. And, if I hadn't had the All-City Band, that might have been a different equation. So I don't know. I think you need to really make sure you have to follow your heart, because if you don't, you'll always worry. You'll wonder, what if I'd done that? It doesn't mean that all your decisions are going to be great ones and that all your experiences are going to be good ones.
Yeah.
But at least you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I chose to do this. And I guess that would be it. You choose to decide what you're going to do. Don't let things happen to you. You make the decision, that you go on your best instincts and try it. And, it's like I used to tell people that were students of mine that were going to take co-op in high school. Do it. Well, I don't know what I want to do. All the more reason, because what you're going to do is you're going to take co-op with something you think you like, and you'll either discover you like it, which will help you, or you'll discover you don't like it, which will help you, because you'll know that that's not where you want to be. And part of that self-discovery, So I had a whole lot of different jobs. I didn't like them all the same amount, but I'm glad I made those choices. And you don't look back. You follow your heart and don't look back.
Yeah. No, I think that's good advice, especially even beyond like young students and like teenagers who are thinking of pursuing that, but even to people who are coming out of university, that sort of like, it's not the non-linearity of that, I think, is an important thing to recognize, because I know tons of students who are like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then they are not doing that because they experienced something and they went, oh, that's actually not what I want to do. And it's hard when you're a music student to have that sort of jarring, because it is such a passion-led thing in a lot of ways. At least from my colleagues and the people that are my friends. On that, a little not quite on that note, but from your work as a teacher and your work as a student, why is music education important? How would you phrase the importance of like music education?
For me, I guess I'm going to put it in the context of the kids of the age that I've taught, because that's why music education was important to them, I felt. And I taught basically, 11 to 19-year-olds in that range. And for virtually all of them, music was a huge part of them growing up through that time. And we think about, generations talking about their generation's music. Well, that generation isn't really talking about them as 20 or 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds. It's talking about the music they heard when they were in that 11 to 19 range that tore at their heart, that when they hear that song, it makes them feel a certain way again.
Yeah.
So the power of that, I'd start with that. I'd say that's indisputable, that when exposed to music has a psychological, emotional impact on you, and it can be a huge source of support, I think. And that's without even getting into teaching it. I just mean the actual existence of the music in terms of kids at that age. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's going to sound trite because it's like what everybody says, but it's a vehicle for self-expression. Gives kids a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves, and teaches them self-discipline and all those kind of things. Those are sort of academic reasons for why the course should exist. And I think we need to have those as music educators, because that's the world that we're having to convince.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. The more, how would I put it? The more controversial view, I think, is that it's been shown now that most of what you learn, even in university, in terms of actual knowledge, becomes redundant pretty quickly because the world is evolving so quickly in terms of the knowledge. So it's not the knowledge that's important. So when they say to you, well, you got to take math. Well, who would ever say it? But why? Right? What did the Greeks study? Music and art, and there was one more. Those were the important things. And I see this now with my own two sons who are in their early 20s trying to find their way and find their career. What's going to get them their career? In one case, my older son now has what I would call a big boy job. He's got a real job. That came through his skills, his abilities, his beliefs, his level of commitment. It did not come from what he learned in his degree.
Yeah.
The content was irrelevant. And so I think then you transpose back to what you're learning in the classroom. And while those things don't seem like really great selling points, well, they're learning self-discipline or they're learning to work with others in a team. Yes, they are. And we have to recalibrate how important we think that is. And it's critical because the other stuff, and as I say, it's a little bit blasphemous to say it, but the actual content, not that important. Not that important. It's the kind of human being that you evolve into during your time in school and what you come out the other end with in terms of your skills and your abilities. So anyway, that's what I would say.
Yeah. No, I think I've asked that question a few times, and obviously I have to answer that question as a person who did music and works in teaching a lot. Yeah. And it's the end of the day, it's like, I wouldn't be who I am, and most of the people I know, even those who don't do music full time, wouldn't be who they are without having learned music. And they will talk about that as a hugely fundamental experience. I'm lucky enough that I have 3 guys in my band, one of which I've known for a long time, one of which I didn't have, who was a little older, so I didn't know him. But we all had the same 7, 8, well, in our case, 6, 7, 8, because we're old, 6, 7, 8 music teacher. And she's instrumental in if I want to trace everything of the who I became, she's the target, she's the person. And it's interesting because even interacting with obviously my friend who I've known since that time and the other guy in my band who also had that teacher, I can see it in the way that they move through the world and how they pursue things, and that they learn those skills are partially indebted to the experience that we had as 11-year-olds screaming out soprano notes in choir. So we're sort of coming to the end of our chat. Thank you for talking with me. And as we sort of finish that up, one of the things we like to do here to sort of round ourselves up and have a little fun at the end is called the Fast 5, which is fast, rapid fire questions. They're not really related to music, but they're sort of more fun, more enjoyable trivia things so we can get to know you a little bit better. So, you ready?
Sure.
Question number 1. Do you have a favorite movie soundtrack, and what is it?
People may not have even heard of this, but and it's probably going to sound very childish, but there was a Disney movie called The Emperor's New Groove, which was a spin-off from Aladdin. It had the Aladdin characters in it. And it had this incredible soundtrack. The theme is a song, Tom Jones.
Yeah.
Who was old he was on TV when I was a kid. Tom Jones singing this tune. It was an incredible Latin tune with amazing instrumentals and stuff like that. Sting wrote a lot of the music for the movie.
Yeah.
So I would say that Emperor's New Groove. It has, so Sting sings on it. Tom Jones sings on it. Eartha Kitt sings on it. Everybody go Google it.
Yeah. No, I saw that movie when I was a kid, and I watched it. Had a spin-off TV show on ABC Family or whatever it was when I was a kid. It was so good. Yeah. I love that movie.
I know I was supposed to say something really serious there, but
it's fine.
The one I would say.
It's fine. Which it's got to. These are from the heart questions. Off the dome. What's your favorite concert you've attended?
Oh well.
Top 3.
I'm going to cheat and say 2. I saw Paul McCartney here in Ottawa. I think it was here in Ottawa. Anyway, very recently. He was, I think, 69 or 70. And you have that feeling sometimes when you see somebody that's the last time you're going to see them. So that was cool. My favorite, I think, we went as a family to Vernon, New York one New Year's Eve, and I saw Earth, Wind and Fire live. And I'd been a huge Earth, Wind and Fire fan. You talk about music of your age, right? You're 11 to 19. Earth, Wind and Fire was huge for me in that sort of 17, 18, 19, 20 range. Seeing them live, unbelievable. Unbelievable. In this little casino in Vernon, New York, you know? They're not exactly playing the big stadiums anymore, but meant a lot to me.
That's amazing. I would love to see Earth, Wind and Fire. That feels like a super fun time. Number 3, I guess this question maybe you will be interesting because you've played a lot of instruments, but what is an instrument you wish you played?
The one I wish I played is the one that you play around the campfire, because you can't play piano there and you can't play trumpet there. I don't play guitar. I wish I could play guitar. I've tried to learn guitar, and the problem is I play piano far too proficiently. It makes me impatient about learning guitar. And I've sort of abortively tried a couple of times to learn it, and I just go, forget it. I'll just keep playing piano. But I see these people with a portable chordal instrument that are able to use it in that kind of informal setting. And I wish I could play guitar.
Yeah, it's never too late to learn. You can have third time's the charm, right?
I guess.
So obviously you have a lot of music talents. You've done a lot of things within the music field, but do you have like a hidden talent?
Well, my wife says I'm not bad at Jeopardy because my mind is filled with useless trivia. When I was in high school, there was a show on here in Ottawa called Reach for the Top, which was essentially Jeopardy with the normal trivia questions. And I was on the school team for that, which counted for absolutely nothing in terms of social cachet. But anyway, so I suppose that I know all kinds of useless pieces of information that I share from time to time.
Hey, having useless information is better than having no information at all. And the last question I have is, what's the last show you binge watched? So like watched a ton of like all at once.
Well, that's easy because we're partway through it. We binge watched lots of things. Prison Break, 24, Younger, some of those. The one I'm on now is a show called Manifest, which is, I can't even describe it. People can find it if they want to look for it. It's the premise is amazing. The plane takes off from Jamaica to come back home to wherever they are in the States, and 5.5 years disappears. So when they land, everybody else is 5.5 years older. Damn. And of course, the world has changed a lot in that time. And for them, they haven't missed a second. They just got on the plane and landed. For everybody else, it's 5.5 years older. So anyway, that's pretty cool.
That's cool. That's interesting. I love those sort of like lost time plots. Yeah. It's like the ramifications. Cool. It's a great sci-fi setup. So that's sort of the end of our major questions. Thank you for answering so eloquently and with so many interesting stories from your
Yeah, it was long. Absolutely.
I was going to say long and varied career. Vibrant and varied career.
Yes,
vibrant and varied.
Fulsome, yes.
Fulsome, yeah. But do you have anything exciting coming up? How is MusicFest sort of like looking forward to sort of hopefully moving through the remainder of the pandemic kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking that. We had our nationals in March 2020 canceled. They were to be in Calgary, and so that's right when pandemic hit in a couple of months before that.
Yeah.
So we did nothing really that year. This past year, we've done what everybody does, is try and adjust everything into a virtual world. So we were actually successful. We think we were the only music festival in North America to actually put on a festival. And we had 55 student ensembles from all across the country, virtually. And we knitted them all together into 3 days worth of lives. Well, they weren't live streaming, but streaming as the festival. So if you tuned into the festival, you'd see a whole day's worth of performances the way you would normally.
Yeah.
So part of it, that was quite a process to conceptualize and then develop the infrastructure behind it to do the virtual festival. And the neat thing is, next year, so right now we're planning for May 2022, a live festival in Niagara Falls, which is a fantastic place to be.
Yeah.
We've been there a couple of times before, and it's always a huge hit. So we're planning that track, but whether we end up having to go virtual or not, we're going to maintain the virtual track as well. We're actually doing it. It's a recording. You can submit a recording and then you get a virtual clinic from it. What has emerged through our thinking about this is the recognition, and I mean, it's pretty obvious. This year, every year there, I don't know, I'm going to pick a number that's conservative, at least 1,500 groups that qualify to nationals from all across the country through 55 different regional festivals.
Yeah.
Most of them don't come to nationals. Some choose not to. Some never thought of it. Some can't afford to. It's the last group. Okay. So that little band from northern BC that can't come to Niagara Falls can now participate in MusicFest because now we've started the recording and clinic track. So out of something very terrible, being the pandemic, has developed this idea that will, in the long term, allow more kids and more schools to have that MusicFest Nationals experience through a virtual window, which we never had before. I mean, if you didn't come, that was it. That was the thing. So that's kind of cool. I'm looking forward to seeing. Well, I'm hoping we have a live festival. Right? We're planning for that and hoping things will evolve enough through the year. Here in Ontario, the government has now said you can go back and play an instrument as long as you're socially distanced. So I'm optimistic, but it will be neat to see how many of these schools that wouldn't come choose to be involved the other way, virtually.
I think that's the wonderful opportunity coming out of this, is the way to use the sort of fluency that a lot of organizations now have with like digital technology to make it more accessible for people who didn't have access to it, especially in music, where that's the financial barrier for those kind of large things, and even small scale, are high. Like being able to afford to drive your kid, have the time to drive your kid to a music lesson can go away if they have a laptop and can sit at home and study with you. So I think that's really cool that MusicFest is sort of like finding a way to make them evolve and respond, not just sort of like reset back to normalcy.
Right.
But thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. It's been great to hear about all the wealth of knowledge that you have and learn from you in the last little bit. Again, for the audience, thank you for watching. I've been Sandy Wright, talking to Neil Yorke-Slader. For Bandology's interview series, we have videos every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday for the rest of the summer, and Thursdays through the fall and winter. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for being on.
Thanks very much, Sandy.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. If you like what you heard, you can learn more about our organization at bandology.ca, which features information about music education, advocacy and research, and our Play a Gig and Bandcamp programs. Follow us on social media for more videos, performance, and interviews on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.